The year was 1892. Winter had come down hard over the Bitterroot Range, laying its full weight across the town of Silverpine. Snow-blanketed rooftops hung heavy on pine boughs and turned the old roads to bone-white silence. They said it was the kind of winter that remembered your name, the kind that didn't just visit, but moved in and sat heavy on your chest. In that cold, one woman stood against the wind. Her name was Eleanor Hart, schoolteacher, widow, and one of the last lights still burning on the edge of town. She stood in the doorway of the one-room schoolhouse, coatless, lips chapped, and eyes fixed on the empty road ahead. The wind cut through her like memory, sharp and unforgiving. The children had gone home an hour earlier, boots crunching through the snow in little pairs and trios. Their laughter was long gone now, buried somewhere beneath the howl of the hills. Eleanor remained behind, said it was to clean the chalkboard. Truth was, she wasn't ready to go back. Not to that quiet cabin where her husband Jacob's coat still hung on the peg by the door. 6 months since he vanished into a storm, chasing help that never came. 3 months without a paycheck. And now, just one blizzard away from being a footnote in a town that barely remembered she was there. But she remembered. Every creak of floorboard, every whisper of wind through the eaves. That house held a silence louder than thunder. She finally stepped out into the snow, lantern in hand, shawl pulled tight. Each footfall sank deep, like the land itself wanted to swallow her whole. The wind grabbed at her skirt and lashed at her cheeks. She grit her teeth and pushed forward, the lantern casting long, trembling shadows on the drifts around her. By the time she reached her door, her hands were too numb to work the key. It slipped. Once, twice, then finally, clicked. Inside was worse. No warmth, no fire, no sound but the door creaking closed behind her. She lit the small lamp on the windowsill and dropped her satchel. Snow still clung to her hem. Her breath clouded the air. Jacob's coat still hung there, heavy, untouched. She didn't take it down. Couldn't. Instead, she sat in the old rocking chair by the cold hearth and stared into nothing. It wasn't hunger that twisted her stomach. It was the weight of everything missing. Then came the knock. Firm, singular, like someone asking permission or delivering fate. Eleanor stiffened. Her breath caught. "Who is it?" she called out, voice tight, fingers brushing the revolver that sat dust-covered on the mantel. "Name's Gideon Rourke," came the voice. Steady, deep. From North Bend Ranch. She knew the name. Everyone did. Ex-cavalry. Rancher. Lived alone near the high ridges. Not known for kindness or company. "What do you want?" she asked, not moving from her place by the fireless hearth. "Firewood," he answered. "And maybe a warm meal, if you've got either." That was how it began. A knock in a storm, a voice through the dark, and for Eleanor Hart, the beginning of something she didn't yet have the strength to name. Eleanor didn't answer right away, just sat there, heart thudding like the wind against her windows. The man's voice hadn't carried pity, just calm, as though he were used to storms outside and in. She rose slowly, her joints aching from cold. Crossed the room and eased open the door. Gideon Rourke stood framed in the snow, tall, dusted with frost, his coat thick with ice. One gloved hand gripped a canvas sack filled with chopped firewood. "I heard you'd been left to fend for yourself," he said simply. "Didn't come to intrude. Just thought you might need the heat." His voice was low even, not asking, not begging, just offering. Eleanor stepped aside without a word. He entered, moved to the hearth, and laid the wood down in a neat pile. From his coat pocket, he pulled kindling and a matchbox. He knelt and lit the fire with practiced ease. The flames sputtered, then caught. Orange light bloomed in the gloom. "You've been watching the schoolhouse," Eleanor said, her arms crossed. "I've seen you, every morning this week." "Wasn't hiding it," Gideon replied. feeding a log into the new flame. Why? Wanted to see how long you'd last. Eleanor's back stiffened, the cold pride in her spine rising. I don't need saving. Didn't say you did. He looked up then, and in the flickering light his face wasn't harsh, just tired, just honest. But I know what it is to hold everything together with frost in your bones, he said quietly. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the wind screamed like it was losing something. Inside, the warmth slowly grew. Why now? Eleanor asked. Why tonight? Because the storm coming next will swallow this whole valley if someone doesn't act, he said. And because I'd rather not watch a good woman freeze out of pride. They shared a meal, what little she had. Stale bread, watered broth. Gideon didn't complain. Didn't offer to replace it either. Just ate quietly. He spoke of trails iced over, wolves on the ridges, cattle lost to drifts, of a brother lost to war, and a wife lost to fever. Eleanor told him nothing. But somehow, he seemed to understand. When he stood to go, he left half the wood beside the hearth and placed a brown parcel on the table, flour, coffee, cheese. I'll be back, he said at the door, to check on the children, and maybe to see if your pride's thawed any. He didn't wait for a response. Eleanor didn't answer, but when the door shut behind him and she sat once more by the fire, she noticed something strange. Her hands had stopped shaking. The storm didn't pass. It only deepened. Snow came in sideways, blanketing Silverpine in a white silence so thick it blurred the line between land and sky. Most folks shuttered their homes, bolted their doors, and waited. But Eleanor Hart. She walked to the schoolhouse every morning like the wind owed her something. Each day fewer children came. First it was 8, then 5, then 3. There was Mary Ellis, freckled, determined, her father laid up with a broken leg. Then Jonas Talbert, boots too big, face too proud to admit the paper stuffed in the toes. And little Sophie Flynn, no longer speaking since her mother's funeral the month before. Eleanor greeted each one like they were 10, pulled them in from the wind, and lit what remained of her kindling. They studied by candlelight. Eleanor wrapped Sophie's hands in her own to keep the blood moving. She read to them from a battered copy of Little Women, her voice low, steady, even as the room grew colder. I've got the key to my castle in the air, she read softly, but whether I can unlock the door remains to be seen. The words caught in her throat, and that's when the door opened. Snow spilled in, and so did Gideon Rourke. School's closed, he said, voice flat. Says who? Eleanor rose, jaw clenched. I do. The storm's turned. This building won't hold another night. I brought a wagon, blankets, hot water, space for 3. You're not taking my students anywhere, she said, stepping between him and the door. Already spoke to their families, Gideon said. They know. They agreed. Mary had already grabbed her slate. Jonas clutched his books. Sophie's eyes stayed on the fire. You should have spoken to me, Eleanor snapped. I did, he replied. 3 days ago, you didn't listen. They stared at one another, heat and cold colliding like fronts in a storm, neither backing down. I'm their teacher, she said, and I'm trying to keep them alive. And in that breathless moment, she wasn't just speaking to him. She was speaking to everything that threatened to bury her. Finally, Eleanor stepped aside. The children filed out into the storm toward safety. She remained alone in the empty room, but only for a moment. Gideon returned, quiet, uninvited. Again, he looked around at the frost creeping up the windows. You'll freeze in that cabin, he said. I'll manage. You won't. You know it. He crossed the room, slow and sure, and placed a folded paper on her desk. Room and board, he said. You teach the ranch hands children until spring. A fair contract, a real classroom. Eleanor unfolded the page. His handwriting was clean. The terms clear: salary, housing, independence. Why me? She asked, her voice brittle as glass. Because you didn't quit, Gideon said, when anyone else would have. And because they trust you. She didn't say yes. Not then. But that night, in the fire's glow, she held the contract in her lap and whispered the first true word she'd allowed herself in months. Please. Not for rescue. Not for salvation. Just for a chance. 2 days later, Eleanor Hart arrived at North Bend Ranch with nothing but a satchel, her resolve, and the contract folded neatly inside her coat pocket. The library had been cleared, shelves pushed back. A classroom carved from a forgotten room, 10 desks made from crates, a chalkboard hung between 2 windows, oil lamps glowing against the early morning dim, and warmth. For the first time in weeks, warmth waited for her. She lit the fire with practiced hands. A kettle hissed on the stove. She allowed herself a breath. Just one. Before the sound of hooves filled the yard, a wagon pulled up, trailing laughter and snow. 10 children tumbled in, boots thudding, scarves flying, cheeks red with cold and wonder. "Miss Hart?" one boy asked, blinking up at her. "Are you really a teacher?" "I am," she replied, brushing snow from his shoulder. "Ma said you taught in town before the blizzard," a girl added. "I still do," Eleanor said gently. "Just in a different room now." The children took their seats, some shy, some bold. Their slates were worn, clothes patched, but their eyes gleamed with something she hadn't seen in too long. Curiosity, trust. By noon, the room was alive. Chalk scraped, questions flew, and Eleanor moved from desk to desk with a quiet joy she didn't know she still carried. Some of the children couldn't spell their names, but could list every part of a saddle. Others couldn't sit still, but could count cattle in 3 languages. When she asked them to draw something they loved, the answers were varied: horses, mountains, fire pits. But Rosa's picture stopped her heart. Rosa had drawn Eleanor herself, standing at the blackboard, fire glowing behind her. And beneath it, in careful letters, "She makes the cold go away." At noon, Gideon entered, tray in hand, bringing bread, stew, and mugs of hot milk. The room quieted instantly. To them, he wasn't just a man, he was a legend. "Eat," he said simply, setting the tray down. Then he turned and left, without another word. Eleanor served the food. The children ate hungrily. She watched as some of them passed slices of bread to others, silently, instinctively. She didn't eat. Her hunger wasn't for food. It was for something she hadn't yet dared to name. When the sleds came to carry the children home, Eleanor stayed behind. She wiped the slate clean, stacked books, marked papers, and when she heard the knock, she didn't flinch. Gideon stepped inside, snow dusting his coat. "You made an impression," he said. "They made one too," Eleanor replied. He stepped forward and placed a wrapped bundle on her desk. A wool blanket, stitched in neat red patterns over deep blue. "Catherine made them," he said softly. "The winter before she passed. And you kept them in the classroom." "She believed in warmth," he answered. "Even for strangers." They stood in silence then, not tense but measured, as though something between them had shifted, not yet named, but real. "Good night, Mr. Rourke," she said. "You can call me Gideon," he replied. She didn't, not yet. But after he left, she folded the blanket around her shoulders and stood near the fire, letting the quiet settle. Later that night, she found Rosa's drawing again. Eleanor smiling, children at her side, fire behind her. In the corner, the little girl had written, "Our new teacher," and Eleanor Hart closed her eyes and let herself believe it might be true. The snow kept falling, but not like before. It drifted quietly now, soft, steady, like a long-held breath. Trails turned to slush and ice. Fences re-emerged from their ghostly white coats. The land softened. But one night, the storm came from within. Eleanor had just finished sweeping the chalk dust from her skirts when she heard it, deep, rough, and unmistakable. A cough, not from cold, but from fever. It came from somewhere near the barn. She threw on her shawl, stepped out into the snow. There, by the horse trough, Gideon was doubled over, one hand gripping the rail, the other pressed to his ribs. "Gideon," she called. "You're sick." He turned too quickly. His breath hitched. "Just a cough," he said. "I'm fine." But when he wiped his mouth with his sleeve, it came away red. Without waiting for permission, Eleanor took his arm and half dragged him into the main house. The parlor was dim, but the fire flared as she fed it more wood. "Sit. Don't argue." And this time, he didn't. She fetched a basin, wet cloths, boiled water. He fought her, half-hearted, too weak to resist. "You're used to doing things yourself," she said. "So am I, but not tonight." "My husband, Jacob, he went out in a storm," she whispered. "Last winter, said he'd find help. He never came back. I waited through spring, through summer, through the fall, and when the ground began to freeze again, I marked a place for him anyway." Her voice didn't tremble, it had gone past trembling. Gideon looked at her through fever-bright eyes. "You never talk about him." "No," she said, "I don't." He reached out then, hand rough and shaking, and took her wrist, not forceful, just present. "I'm not him," he whispered. "I know," she said, and she meant it. She stayed beside him that night, feeding the fire, feeding him spoonfuls of water, whispering stories into the hush, just to keep the silence from claiming him. He drifted in and out, but he didn't let go of her hand. At dawn, the fever broke, slowly, like thawed river ice. He opened his eyes clear this time and found her dozing beside him, her head resting on her folded arms. "Eleanor," he said hoarsely. She stirred. "You're awake." "I'm sorry," he murmured. "For what?" "For making you remember." "Some memories don't go away," she said, "but you don't have to carry mine. You've got enough of your own." And he did. That morning he told her about Catherine, about how she taught at the mission school, right up until she collapsed in the snow. "I built that classroom for her," he said, "but I couldn't open it, not until you." Eleanor didn't cry. She hadn't in a long time, but her hand, still holding his, tightened just a little. They were no longer strangers. They were something else. Not lovers. Not yet. But no longer just two people bracing against the cold. The days that followed came like cautious footsteps. The storm faded, leaving behind brittle air and long silences. But inside the classroom, warmth returned. The children spilled in each morning, boots stamping, voices carrying. Eleanor greeted them with warm mugs, sweetened milk, a hint of cinnamon, just enough to thaw their fingers and lift their spirits. That week, Gideon brought something wrapped in burlap, set it on her desk without a word. "It was Catherine's," he said. "She kept it near her desk, said it helped her think." Eleanor unwrapped it slowly, revealing a small lap quilt, stitched with uneven squares of old flannel and muslin. Faded but warm. Not beautiful, but deeply human. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once, then turned to leave, but paused. "You don't have to carry it all alone." That afternoon, Rosa brought another drawing. Eleanor and Gideon sitting beside each other at the fire. Beneath them, in her careful script, "Together, the cold stays away." Eleanor's breath caught, not from grief, but something warmer. something she hadn't let herself feel in months. Later that night, she found a parcel in her drawer, new boots, soft gloves, and a small leather book of poetry. No note, no signature. But she knew. She placed the book gently beside Jacob's pocket watch, not as replacement, but as proof that two truths could live side by side. Spring edged in slow, drips from the eaves, tracks in the slush, and eventually a trip to town. At the general store, she heard them, voices behind barrels and linens. She's living in his house now. Still wears green, not black. Shameless, really, teaching his children like they're her own. Eleanor didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her hands were steady, her spine straight. But when she walked back to the ranch, the words clung like wet snow. Gideon saw it in her eyes the moment she stepped into the barn. "What did they say?" he asked. "That I've taken your name without earning it." He didn't flinch, just reached into his coat and pulled out another paper. "It's not a ring," he said. "It's a contract. Marriage, if you want it. Legal. Name on paper. No expectations. Your room. Your life. But it'll protect you. The school." "Why?" she asked. "Because the world bites hard," he said. "And this will make it think twice." They married 3 days later. No guests, no fanfare. Just a reverend, the housekeeper Mrs. Chen as witness, and vows spoken in the parlor by lamplight. Eleanor wore the green dress, the one she'd been saving for something that didn't feel like mourning. When the reverend said, "You may kiss the bride," Gideon only brushed her cheek. And she let him. That night the snow returned, not fierce, not loud, just steady and soft, like a memory falling in slow motion. Eleanor sat in her room still, fire crackling, the marriage certificate tucked inside a drawer alongside Jacob's pocket watch and the poetry book. There came a knock. She didn't hesitate. "Come in," she called. Gideon stepped inside, something in his hands. Not papers this time, not contracts. "I brought you something," he said, holding out a small pot. Dirt, roots, and just beginning to bloom, one stubborn bud. "A rose bush?" she asked, blinking. "It's not spring." "Not yet," he said. "But I thought, maybe you're ready for something to grow." She took it carefully, hands trembling not from cold, but from what it meant. "I don't love you," she said suddenly, almost too quickly. "I don't know if I can." "I know," Gideon said, "and I'll wait, even if it never comes." That silence between them didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a field before bloom, like something possible. That night she moved the rose to the windowsill beside her bed, watched it in the firelight, guarded it. Not out of grief, but hope. The next morning Rosa asked her, "Is that your flower, Miss Hart? The one Mr. Rourke brought you?" "It is," Eleanor said, smoothing the child's braid. "He thinks it might bloom even in winter." "Do you believe him?" Eleanor looked toward the window. The bud had opened just a little. "Maybe I do," she said. It came suddenly. One morning, just past dawn, Eleanor glanced at the classroom windowsill and saw it, bold, bright, impossibly early. The rosebud, red, slow to unfurl, but there, growing against the odds, just as he said it might. She smiled without meaning to, and her hand rested, almost instinctively, against her belly. The children had noticed, long before she said anything. It was Rosa who asked first, in her soft, curious voice. "Miss Hart, is there a baby in there?" And Samuel, always blunt, followed it up. "So does that mean Mr. Rourke is your real husband now?" Eleanor laughed, a sound that surprised even her. "He always was," she said, smoothing her skirt. "I just didn't know it yet." That same day, Gideon returned from town with 2 crates. One held chalk, paper, and new slates. The other held tiny pots, soil, and green sprigs just waiting for warmth. "They're yours," he said, setting them on the porch, "if you want them." "I do," she replied, standing in the doorway, watching him in the morning light. She followed him to the barn, watched as he fed the horses. His coat hung open, hair sunlit and a little too long. Something softened in her chest. "Gideon," she said. "I've been wearing your name for nearly 2 months now. I think it's time I stopped pretending." "Pretending what?" he asked, turning to face her. "That it doesn't matter," she said. Her voice trembled. "That I don't feel something. But I do. I didn't think I could. Not after Jacob. But you." "Say it," he whispered, not moving. "I love you, Gideon Rourke." And when he kissed her, it wasn't bold. It wasn't urgent. It was the kind of kiss that grows slowly over time, like roots in spring soil. Quiet, but deep. "And here I thought I was the one teaching the lessons," Eleanor murmured against his chest. "Guess we're both learning," he said, holding her just a little tighter. That night, he moved the rosebush into their shared room, no longer hers alone. It had 3 buds now. One fully open, deep red in the lamplight. "Catherine used to say winter roses were impossible to keep alive," Gideon whispered. "Maybe," Eleanor said. "They just needed the right hands." It happened sooner than anyone expected. On a morning brushed with sun and the scent of thawing earth, Eleanor's labor began. The roses had only just started blooming. The trails were still wet with meltwater. But life, it seemed, didn't wait for the perfect moment. Mrs. Chen boiled water, laid out linens, and Gideon Rourke never left Eleanor's side. "Breathe," he whispered, fingers wrapped around hers. "You're not alone." She was tired, in pain, but she never let go of his hand. And then, in the hush before a sunrise, the child came. Red-faced, full of fight, lungs crying strong into the morning. A boy. Eleanor wept, not for pain, but for joy. A grief finally cracked open wide enough for something new to root itself in the center. "Thomas James Rourke," she whispered, cradling him to her chest. "Thomas, for Jacob's memory," she said. "James, for strength. Rourke, for home." Gideon didn't speak. Just held her, the baby, and the world in his arms, like it had all come back to him at once. A week later, the bell rang again over Silverpine Valley. Children came back to school with wild laughter and fresh pencils. Eleanor sat on the porch, Thomas in her arms, Gideon beside her. Her world now full of little voices and blooming hope. She looked down at her son, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "You were born from winter, but you are made of spring." "I told you I'd wait," Gideon said softly. Eleanor turned to him, her smile the first true summer after a long, long cold. "And I told you, it was worth it. So, if you ever pass through Silverpine, listen close. You might hear laughter from the old ranch house, or the sound of chalk on slate, or the cry of a boy born in a snowstorm. Because not all legends wear guns or ride into the sunset. Some carry wood, some share blankets, some light fires that never go out. This was the winter that broke and mended Eleanor's heart. And that, my friend, is a truth worth telling. Pass it on.